J.D. Vance won last night's debate. OK, that is my opinion, and it's the opinion of most media outlets, too. The New York Times. Even the New York Times says Vance was dominant. Walz did not show well. He lost. The ABC anchor Lindsay Davis compared his performance with Joe Biden's in the disastrous June 27th debate. That is not good. So the lineup in November is Trump and Vance, forthright, confident, dynamic, versus Harris and Walz, nervous, tentative, and guarded. Vance really scored points when he got into Kamala Harris's record on the economy. That is the big issue. It's something the Harris-Walz team want to gloss over, to cover up. Vance delivered a one-liner. You've made gas, groceries and housing unaffordable for American citizens. That's a winner. He scored more points when he revealed the Harris-Walz abysmal border record. That's another big issue which they want to run away from.
Joining me now is the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors CEO and President Eric Copland. Eric, good to see you. Your reaction to this extension of the contract until January?
You know, we're certainly pleased that the ports are going to be reopening this morning. Wholesaler distributors, as you know, has been working for months to ensure there is as minimum disruption to the supply chain as possible. So we're pleased with that. But at the same time, Maria, this was completely unnecessary. We've seen probably a $15 billion impact to the American economy. And it's not like there's a light switch here that's going to go on and everything is back to normal. It's more like a traffic accident where it slows traffic for hours. But in this case, with so many container ships off the Gulf Coast and the eastern seaboard, there's more than 60 ships. This is going to take weeks to clear, weeks to resolve, and there's a whole mess. There's ships that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday were rerouted to the West Coast. You know, they're probably somewhere approaching the Panama Canal now, and that's just going to take things longer. So there still is certainly an impact, but we're pleased to see that we've resolved this at least for the next 3 months.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, obviously plans were put in place to switch some of these routes, given the expectation that they would stay on strike. So how long does it take to get that schedule back in place? And throughout all of this, Eric, I guess the automation conversation is happening, right? So where does the port automation stand in all of this? Because you've said that there's still concerns around that. Plus, you hit on how one union has the ability to hold the economy hostage with regard to that. Explain it.
Well, that's right. And you know, first of all, while the ports are going back to work today, wholesaler distributors, we don't get to go back to normal today because there's going to possibly be a strike 3 months from today. And so now we have to take all of the costly measures that we've been taking the last few months. We have to continue those to prepare for another possible disruption. So our lives don't get easier. And as we've talked about in this program, one of the major issues that are remaining is whether or not we can introduce automation to the ports. And what the American people need to understand is we are so far behind the rest of the world, and this really has an inflationary impact. You know, I agree that certainly the folks at the docks are working hard and deserve a fair increase, but think about every dollar that we put into their pockets means that everything that flows through those ports costs more money. So there's an inflationary impact. If we were to move to automation, if we can move things far more efficiently like the Chinese do, like they do in the Netherlands and Europe and all around the globe, things would cost less. And so there are still big issues here to be resolved.
Well, the fight is yet to come, that's for sure, on automation. Eric, great to get your insights. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Maria. Good to see you.
Eric Copland joining us.
All right, I want to show you live shots right now of Port Newark in New Jersey, Port Liberty, Bayonne, New Jersey, two of the some 24 key ports and entryways for commerce in the United States. A lot of goods, a lot of boxcars find their way there to and from all points around the world. They could be eerily silent effective midnight tonight as 45 dock workers go on strike. The impact with all of that with Austin Goolsbee, the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank president. Austin, always good to see you. This is an event you and your colleagues at the Fed can't plan on. I understand that. But are you worried if this drags on?
Yeah, especially if it drags on. This seems like it fits into my old Chicago motto. I always tell you, Neil, there is no bad weather. There is only bad clothing. And things happen that we're going to have to take into account and deal with by how they affect the conditions. We've gone through, in the last year or two, a big strike in the auto industry. We've gone through the port collision with the bridge that affected shipping. We went through, in the pandemic, as you know, major problems with shipping and the supply chain. And anything that's a negative supply shock, in our language, that's going to raise the cost of doing business or lead to shortages is something we're just going to have to deal with, and the impacts are never good.
Yeah, I guess if it comes to a strike, once one is on, it could be weeks long, and it go to your fears, Austin, it could raise prices, and that could get in the way of this recovery that you said showed a golden path a little more than a few days ago when you said that. Are you worried about that recovery now?
Yeah, look, central bank's job is to be worried about everything, and there shouldn't be anything that you can come up with that we haven't at least thought of that it's a possible complication for our plan. That said, we set an interest rate very high more than a year before and held it there, and now we've started reducing that rate because conditions have gotten more back to normal. I mean, if you look at the new inflation numbers, they're coming in relatively pretty close to target. And if you look at the unemployment rate and the job market, we've gotten back to a steady state, kind of a sustainable level that's close to what we think of as full employment. And if you think of, in my mind, I think of it a little bit like the bathtub. You know, you want the water to be the right temperature. If it's too hot, you got to add cold water. But once the bath is the temperature you want it, you got to reduce the amount of cold water you're adding. And so that's why, as I look out over this next year, interest rates coming down is going to be the order of the day, because you want the rates to be normal, just like the other conditions getting back to normal.
Yeah, I just wonder, that cold water, do you need, a quarter point of that, or do you need a half point of that to sort of deal with it at the next meeting?
Yeah. Depends what the conditions are, and
Right.
The more you're seeing these disruptions, I'm still pretty hopeful that if you see a lot of the evidence on just GDP growth and how fast the economy is growing, you're seeing some of the private sector forecasts and the Atlanta Fed's GDP now upping their estimates of what this quarter's GDP growth is going to be. But there's some cautionary indicators on the job market side, and just the way monetary policy works, as you know, you can't wait for it to happen before you start trying to get yourself into position to react, because there's lags in both the data.
I understand that, Austin, but that sounds like a quarter point cut. If you had your druthers now, it would be a quarter point.
I would say the most important thing is not for one meeting, is it one cut or two cuts at that meeting. Right. The most important thing is this is a process over a year or more that we're trying to get the rates down to normal to keep conditions at these decent dual mandate situation that inflation and unemployment are around the target. So it's got to come down a lot more than 25 basis points over the next 12 months. It's going to be a lot of cuts. And if you look at the statement of economic projections, you see it's pretty widely viewed as going to be appropriate by almost everybody.
Yeah, I've heard like in the 3 to 3.25%, 3.5% range a year from now on the Fed funds rate. I don't even know if that's accurate, but I did want to get your thought. Maybe you could tell us after the fact whether, when you guys all deliberated on that half-point cut at the last meeting, well, some of you were concerned about its timing so close to an election. I know that's never supposed to interfere, but some of you, maybe you yourself, Austin, thought, well, we know what Donald Trump might say. We know what Republicans might say. What do you say?
Well, look, what I say is for a year and a half, we've been laying out the economic conditions that would be necessary. Why do we need to raise the rates as high as they were? Why do we need to hold them there high for more than a year? And what would need to happen for us to want to start cutting the rates? And if the economic conditions, which are the thing that drives the Fed's decision making, reflect exactly what we've been saying, to not act in the face of the conditions would itself be a political act. So when you become a sworn member of the Federal Reserve, you're out of the elections business. In this thing, the inflation is coming in close to target. The unemployment rate is up to 4.2, which is around where a lot of people think is sustainable full employment. And the rates are well above where almost everyone thinks that they need to end up. So we got to start moving when the conditions are like that.
Got it. Real quickly, I don't want to belabor the point, but Kamala Harris is talking about dealing with price gouging going on at grocery stores, and that's why prices have rocketed to the extra degree they have. Do you buy that?
As I say, I'm not in the fiscal policy business. They're going to have an argument in the election about what they want to do about prices. The Fed's job is to take fiscal policy as a given, and then we're going to have to react to it. So,
I know that also, but you're also a very smart economist. You're also a smart economist. Has that been a factor here, price gouging?
Well, look, all of that depends on how are you defining what price gouging is. And all I'll emphasize for either side, if you're interpreting business markups as the measure of price gouging, just be a little careful, because that has a dynamic over the business cycle that they go up, they go down, because wages and prices move at different speeds.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. Well, we have an all-star lineup ahead to weigh in on last night's VP debate, including House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, our very own Harris Faulkner, Vivek Ramaswamy, and more. But first up, with grace, style, and relentless messaging, J.D. Vance clobbered Tim Walz in last night's vice presidential debate, and that's the subject of the riff. So, as I said, J.D. Vance clobbered Governor Tim Walz last night in the vice presidential debate. Mr. Vance had grace, style, humility, relentless messaging, even a religious grounding. And he showed how to make crucial policy issues easy to understand for the average viewer. Vance was so good that I think it's quite possible he moved the needle for the Trump team. Now, maybe that's unusual for a vice presidential debate, but I suspect Vance's clarity and repetition just might do it. With 34 days to go before the election, it's clear the economy and the borderless illegal immigration problem are the two issues that will decide this election. So, think about this. Mr. Vance, on 11 separate occasions during the debate, talked about high take-home pay and low inflation during the Trump years. 11 times. Take-home pay. That was Ronald Reagan's easy-to-understand phrase aimed at average working-class families. What real money is left in your wallet or pocketbook after taxes and inflation. Everybody gets it. Vance said this key point 11 times. Take a listen to one of them.
I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. We can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
Wow. Wow, that's all I'll say. You know, simplicity is the most elegant form of messaging, and repetition is crucial in politics. Meanwhile, Governor Tim Walz tying himself up in knots, desperately trying to remember all the things his team crammed into his head. Much of the time, he just fell back on a lot of meaningless word salads. He even bungled the abortion law from his own state. There's a new Minnesota law that allows abortion at any stage in a pregnancy if a doctor approves. J.D. Vance actually tried to help Mr. Walz to understand his own state's law, but it didn't work. But there's more. Vance reminded people of the Biden-Harris affordability crisis. Everyone has suffered because consumer prices have risen much faster than typical working-class wages during the Biden-Harris term. Now, during the Trump years, real average weekly wages were up 9%. During the Harris years, real average weekly wages fell over 4%. Under Mr. Trump, median family income rose roughly $6,000, nearly 5 times the paltry $1,300 gain under Mr. Biden. That's the affordability crisis, and people know it. Personal borrowing costs, by the way, mortgages, cars, credit cards, all those rates skyrocketed, even though they're not even part of the CPI. This is a huge kitchen table issue. Affordability, a crisis. And Vance mentioned this 6 times during the debate. Now, every time Tim Walz started throwing out some complicated big government spending plan, J.D. Vance would gracefully acknowledge there might be something good someplace in one of those plans. But they had over 3.5 years to do it. That was Vance's real message. Why didn't they do it? Including immigration. Vance mentioned illegal immigration 15 times. Walz supported a Senate bill that would have allowed millions of illegals, millions, to continue to come over the border. Illegal immigration and crime. Nothing hard to understand there. Vance made it easy. He was polite, and he occasionally agreed on something with Governor Walz, but he would remind that day one of any Harris idea was 1,400 days ago. And this went along with the 7 times he mentioned 3.5 years. All this is so effective. Just a few key points repeated a number of times with good humor and friendliness. And anyone could see that Mr. Vance is a very smart young man who knows a lot about all kinds of policies as he ran circles around Governor Walz. Take a listen to Mr. Vance's closing statement.
We have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years.
Pretty good, I'd say. Pretty good. Of course, he won the debate. And for those of us who watched it, I'm pretty sure we saw presidential timber. And that's the riff.
All right, we're getting word of air sirens going off in Tel Aviv, among some other Jewish cities here, Israeli cities, that the Iranian missile strike is on. We don't know much more than that. It was expected that it was going to be imminent, and apparently missiles have been launched from Iran. Don't know how long they would take to reach any of the key cities, including Tel Aviv and Israel. It's quite a long ways, as we can remember from last spring when that attack was on. We've got Dana Petard joining us right now, the retired U.S. Army general, author, Hunting the Caliphate, America's War on ISIS and the Dawn of the Strike Cell. He's just the person I want to talk to right now. So, General, it's on. We know the last time Iran was doing this, it fired off more than 300 missiles, I believe. Only one quasi-hit a target, and that just sort of shattered in a field, if memory serves me right. I don't know how many are involved here, how many ultimately will be involved here. What do you think?
Well, good afternoon, Neil. Iran feels like they have to respond because of Israel's incursion into southern Lebanon, their limited attack, and also the destruction and decimation of the Hezbollah leadership, senior leadership. So this is something Iran feels like they need to do. Not sure it's going to be at the scale that we saw in April, 300 missiles and rockets and drones being fired from Iran. Ideally, this will be something that Israel and the U.S. and its allies in the region can handle, but we will see.
So we obviously were warning the Israelis from the intelligence that we had that an attack like this was imminent. We also know that it's a delicate balance for Iran and how it responds. Everyone's concerned about a widening war. This on the same day, we're learning that Israel continues to take out Hezbollah bigwigs or those who provide arms to them. So that's continuing. So they're working on parallel tracks here.
Yes, in fact, this is a unique opportunity for Israel to really hit Hezbollah and hit Hezbollah hard and create a buffer zone in southern Lebanon to protect the Israeli northern towns where almost 70,000 people have evacuated. So Israel is pursuing this aggressively and is being successful, but what they're trying to do is just stabilize their border in the north. And as you also know, Hezbollah has been firing missiles with impunity since the day after October 7th, since October 8th of last year, while Israel's been preoccupied with operations in Gaza. Well, now Israel was able to release some resources and go north and really take care of the Hezbollah issue.
Now what happens when it comes to those Iran is going to look to for help? It might look to Russia, it might look to China, it might look for other players. Obviously, it's doing this to satisfy some of those proxies who might be demanding that Iran do something in response. That's a very weird, delicate balance, right?
Well, yes. And Iran is already looking to China and Russia for support in many ways. Iran's strategy of this ring of fire around Israel, if you look at Hezbollah to the north, the Syrians to the northeast, the Iraqi Shia in Iraq, Hamas in Gaza to the south, and way south, the Houthis, they were surrounding Israel with this ring of fire. But that's unraveling with their proxies right now. So Iran has to look at a new strategy, and or maybe it's time for Iran to sue for peace with both Saudi Arabia and Israel.
How likely do you think that is? Both sides, want to, flex their muscle with this. Israel seems to be, on the offense here, and Iran is in that odd position of not wanting to cower, but very much cowering. Well,
it's because Israel has been very aggressive. They've gotten into the decision-making cycle of both the Iranians and, of course, Hezbollah. Iran is not ready for a conflict right now. So they're going to try to buy time. But it may be a unique opportunity when the dust settles somewhat to have maybe looking at more of a peace agreement between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Muslim Iran, and also include Israel on that. It may be a unique opportunity to do that when this dust settles.
General, if you'll excuse my ignorance, that's why I ask you so many dumb questions. This ballistic missile attack, launching it from Iran to key points in Israel, let's say Tel Aviv, it's going to take a little while, right?
It is. And in fact, in many ways, this is part of the issue with Iran. They feel like they must do this. They're pressured to respond, but it's not going to be that effective because they're telegraphing it and everybody knows it's coming.
And General, as you were speaking here, we're getting confirmation of Yemen Houthi rebels picking up their attacks on U.S. and Western shipping interests in and around the Gulf. Of course, that was already the case. So let's say they continue doing that. We got Hezbollah, even though on the run, promising attacks of its own. Hamas, badly, outmanned and now with fewer men, in control. They're going to coordinate something. Then the issue is, how far does this go? What do you think?
Well, obviously, there's always that threat of a wider conflict. I mean, the U.S. is being prudent by keeping the USS Abraham Lincoln in the region, as well as the USS Harry S. Truman carrier battle groups, as an example, and more forces too, as far as just being prudent. But the Houthis should feel a little bit tough right now in that they're in a position to where they may be next. I mean, they're trying to fire at U.S. ships, at shipping. That's an issue. The world is going to have to figure out something with the Houthis.
General, when I look at this, and of course, Israel has this Iron Dome. It can, counter all of these missiles as it did. I think a little bit more than 300 launched in the last Iranian attack. Virtually all but one of them were destroyed by Israel, and the one that got through landed, I believe, in a field with very little damage. So there is the issue of how much that dome can resist and counter if the strike is dramatically bigger, if it's more than 300 missiles like last time, if it's 600, if others participate, then it gets to be a real test for this unusual global defense, right?
Yes, in fact, the Iron Dome can be overwhelmed with a certain amount of volume of missiles. Remember, even in April, it wasn't just Israel that fought off those missiles. It was Israel with the help of the U.S. and allies in the region that helped defeat those missiles, those rockets, those drones.
So, General, your take on what we do now, apparently there's been a tad more coordination than there was compared to these Israeli-launched missile strikes on Hezbollah positions over the weekend, but not much. And it's Israel doing this, leading all of this, and acting on its own without necessarily much consultation with the United States. What did you make of it?
Actually, I think there's been a lot of consultation with the United States, especially the intelligence community, in helping Q and helping Israel to target different aspects of this operation. The U.S. might not have known about the actual strike on Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, but the U.S. has been involved from a consultation standpoint, intelligence standpoint, in most of the Israeli operations.
All right, General, if you can stay there, Iran has confirmed it has launched missiles toward Israel. The Israeli military confirming, as you can hear from these sirens, that missiles have been launched. We just don't know how many. The U.S. had seen, to the General's point, indications that Iran was preparing for such a launch and that it would be imminent. And now, as I just said, it is on. We just don't know how many missiles are involved.
President Joe Biden heading to Valdosta, Georgia at this hour to tour areas impacted by Hurricane Helene. Now, earlier today, he visited Tallahassee as well as Perry, Florida, to survey the vast devastation. Now, Hurricane Helene is now the second deadliest hurricane in the U.S. since 1969. It's only topped by Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. The death toll currently stands at more than 200. More than 70 of those deaths occurred in North Carolina, which was devastated by fast-moving floodwaters that were caused by the storm. Now, right now, only about 20% of western North Carolina has cell phone or internet access. And the historic village of Asheville, North Carolina, is essentially cut off from civilization. Now, one small Asheville business, New Origin Brewing, was wiped off the face of the earth. And one of the founders, Brian Fetting, I'm pleased to say, joins me now. Brian, our hearts go out to you. Just sort of give us an idea, on the ground there in North Carolina, what are things like? How are you doing?
Things are tough, to say the least. It's hard to travel, hard to get anywhere. Roads that are open for driving have now potentially been closed as they continue to search for bodies, frankly. So the situation there is apocalyptic at best. It's hard to it's hard to be there and hard to experience it, to be honest.
Now, there's also a business angle to this, as well as the human angle that you just described. From a business perspective, is there any hope of salvaging your business?
It's going to be really difficult. The main hurdle we have is, the simple balance sheet of it. We've got a liability, and we've got assets. Those assets are gone. That's a pile of rubble now, and they're scattered for miles. So the difficulty now is navigating it with the banks and trying to figure out how insurance is going to help. It looks like it's not going to fully cover it. So for us as one small business, we employed 10 people. Those people had families, had homes, and we're just hoping to find a way to reopen, but it's going to be a long path.
Are you getting any assistance from the state or the federal government?
At this time, we haven't heard of any assistance that we'll be receiving. FEMA does have assistance on an individual basis. For example, my home personally had a tree branch come down through the roof into the living room. That's something that I'm anticipating FEMA may help with. But as far as the business goes, we're really in limbo right now, and we're hoping that the federal government can come through and give some assistance as needed.
If they don't, are you facing bankruptcy?
There's a real chance. I'm going to have to evaluate a lot of options, and I'll exhaust all of them to avoid that. But if they don't come through, there's a serious chance of that.
You know, I have some family, distant family that was affected much less so than you in Florida. And I think what they said is some of the issue is they either had hurricane insurance, but if flooding was the issue, then the hurricane insurance was denied, or vice versa. How are you dealing with all the insurance companies and whether the hurricane or the flood insurance is enough to cover?
We have some good people on our team and on our side with this, and we're evaluating all the options. You know, even just getting the full language of these policies is hard to do. So right now we're navigating that. We're looking at what it is because, you know, what kind of insurance happens when a rail car gets lifted up and smashes through your building? You know, was that a flood or was that a hazard? What was it? So that's kind of what we're navigating now. I assume it's going to be a long back and forth with these insurance companies. They have it in them to protect us. They took our money, and I hope that they can protect us now that this has happened.
Well, we hope so too, Brian. I think a lot of people are frustrated that we send billions to Ukraine and yet we haven't been able to step up and support you in the right way. So our hearts and our prayers are certainly with you, and we wish you the best on your, you know, the human toll, but also your future business as well. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anyone can donate to a GoFundMe, we would really appreciate it. Or just spreading the word. I think everyone down there feels a little underappreciated right now, and just anything you can do would help. Thanks, Taylor.
Well said. And to do something to help, Fox Corporation has made a donation to the American Red Cross's Hurricane Helene Relief Fund. You can also help if you wish. Visit redcross.org/Fox Forward, or you can scan the QR code right there on your screen.
Welcome back. The Texas Stock Exchange announcing a veteran leadership team in its bid toward building a national stock exchange to rival Wall Street. The TXSE hiring executives from Charles Schwab, the NASDAQ, and the New York Stock Exchange. Former Texas governor and former U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry also named to the board. The Texas Stock Exchange is planning to launch next year. It has already raised $135 million, and it plans to file registration documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the coming months. Joining me now is the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. Governor, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And I know you celebrated the Texas Stock Exchange at the governor's mansion in Austin yesterday. You've been talking about a Texas Stock Exchange for a long time. Tell us about it.
Well, Maria, it just makes sense. You know, Texas has the dominant economy in the United States, a far stronger, more powerful economy than New York. We have the financial infrastructure in place already. Texas has more workers in the financial sector than the state of New York has. One thing that's essential to a stock exchange is to have a robust data centers. Texas already has those data centers in place, and on top of that, we have the flexibility and the agility to add even more data centers to make our stock exchange even more powerful. As you pointed out, this starts out already well funded and having experienced leaders in place. All the pieces have come together, and with this stock exchange going at a rapid pace, it hopefully will get SEC clearance next year, begin trading later on next year, and then listing stocks the year after that.
Well, you'll need the volume of lots of, not just, you know, the exchanges. You'll need more volume from them, but you'll also need the major banks as well, right, to commit to volume. Are you confident that you'll be getting the volume?
So, Maria, the major banks are the investors, part of the investors in the exchange already. So the highest volume trading banks in the country are investors in this project. And so they will be providing the volume to get this thing going at a robust level from the very beginning.
How would you assess the economy there in Texas, given all of the illegal immigration? I'm going to get to what's going on at the border in a second. But have you seen an impact with all of these new people coming in? Because, look, on a national level, Governor, we see that jobs being created are going to non-citizens. Citizens of America have actually seen a decline in jobs in the last several months.
So, Maria, in Texas, over the last month and over the past year, Texas has added more new jobs than any other state, and they are going to Texans or people who are moving to Texas from other states. What we've done on the border in the state of Texas, we have decreased illegal immigration by 85%. Those who do show up, they're moved to other states across the country. So we're hiring Texans, putting Texans to work, as well as Texas is attractive to people from other states, and they're coming here for jobs. But there is no state in America that has more new jobs better than the great state of Texas.
Well, what you've done in terms of the economy and certainly allowing, job creation for citizens is just stunning as you actually hold the line on illegal migration. You got to tell us about this new data we just got from ICE. New Immigration and Customs Enforcement data reveals as of July, there were more than 425,000 illegal migrant convicted criminals released into the U.S. They're living outside of ICE detention. As part of that, 13,000 of them were convicted of murder. More than 15,000 of them were convicted of sexual assault. And now they're on the non-detained docket, meaning they are not prioritized for detention. They are in jail or in prison, or ICE does not know where they are. How is this possible that the Department of Homeland Security does not know where these people are? Now DHS is claiming that this data goes back 4 decades and is being misinterpreted. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that. She repeated that claim yesterday. Here she is. Watch.
I think it's important to correct the record here. First of all, the false representation of the data ICE shared. So that was what we are seeing, false representation. I got to call that out. We got to call that out. And it's been fact-checked by some of your colleagues here, by multiple outlets that has been debunked on what has been falsely misrepresented.
Can you clarify what the misrepresentation is?
The numbers that is being put out about how many people are out has been falsely represented here. If we're going to report something, a data that's out there, we got to do it in a way that is not confusing the American people and certainly not lying.
Governor, she says it's false. We've got the numbers from ICE. They say 13,000 people were convicted of murder. How do you see it?
Karine Jean-Pierre doesn't know what she's talking about. Let's be clear about something. What you said is exactly right, and that is there have been thousands of dangerous criminals who were apprehended at the border, processed by Border Patrol. ICE knows about them, and then they were released by Kamala Harris into the United States of America. This should be a disqualifying factor for Kamala Harris to be president of the United States. About more than 5% of the illegal immigrants that the Biden-Harris administration have allowed in are criminals. These are people who are causing crimes in the United States. You've seen what's happened in New York. We've seen what's happened in Texas. And so this is the importation of crime into our country by Kamala Harris. She cannot be trusted in securing the border or protecting our country. This should be disqualifying for her to be president of the United States.
Well, you've said this many times in past interviews, and you also told the New York Post that Texas can't afford a Kamala Harris presidency after Texas taxpayers had to shell out $10 billion for the state's border security effort. You've recently announced a reward of up to $5,000 for any information leading to the identification and arrest of members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua who've been or are involved in criminal activity in Texas, not to mention harassing people in Colorado, trying to do the same thing in El Paso. What can you tell us about this Tren de Aragua gang?
So listen, the gang is the most treacherous gang across the North, Central, or South America. They are considered to be MS-13 on steroids. They operate at a higher level of sophistication than MS-13, but they go into areas and threaten and sometimes kill people. They are credited with killing Laken Riley, for example. They are threatened to be they're credited to be the ones that shot and harmed the police officers in New York. They've committed crimes even in the state of Texas. The good news is after I made the declaration putting them on the terrorist organization list, we have begun to make arrests in the state of Texas. We are tracking them down. We are arresting them. We are locking them up because we are going to purge Tren de Aragua from the state of Texas.
Well, I mean, look at what they're doing in these pictures in Colorado. Why is it that we needed the governor of Texas yourself to put these maniacs on a terrorist list, and the federal government failed to do that. I mean, we all have been watching how they're harassing people from Colorado to Texas and beyond, and yet it took you to say this is a terrorist organization to be able to get more authority to be able to take them down, Governor. And we haven't heard a word about it from this administration.
Maria, is worse than that, because these are people that the Tren de Aragua are from Venezuela. Remember that Venezuela got almost a free pass into the United States by Biden and Harris. And because Biden and Harris don't have diplomatic relations with Venezuela, we had no data whatsoever to determine whether or not these people had a criminal background, whether or not they should be arrested. Hence, there was an open door for Tren de Aragua to come into the United States to wreak the carnage they are doing. Biden and Harris are doing nothing about it. The only person stepping up to do something about it is the great state of Texas, and we're going to track them down and eliminate Tren de Aragua from the state of Texas.
Unbelievable. Well, we appreciate your efforts, Governor. Thank you so much. This is the same approach that this administration took toward Iran. Iran has an act of war by hacking into a former president's campaign, Donald Trump, and then publicly saying that they want to assassinate him. No response. In fact, what do? We got him a visa to come to the UN General Assembly in New York. Unbelievable. Governor, thank you. Kellyanne Conway. She's also a pollster and a former senior counselor to President Trump. Kellyanne, great to see you. I've been thinking about your reaction to last night. Please give us your assessment of the vice presidential debate and Morgan's reporting.
Sure. Well, it shows why President Trump picked J.D. Vance as his running mate, and it shows the magic and the measurement that happens after somebody submits himself to tough questions in over 100 interviews in the short time he's been the running mate. This is what you need to do. You need to parry with the hostile press under wing of Air Force Two or Trump Force plane. You need to submit yourself to interviews. And President Trump has often said J.D. Vance is unafraid to go into any lion's den of hostile media and shag those flies. You simply cannot show up the first time to do this on a debate stage, as Tim Walz did, hiding from the press and think that somehow you'll be able to stretch those muscles you haven't been using all along. I'm not much into performance and scoring and who won, who lost, because let's face it, this country is hurting. We have chaos and crisis, not in a tweet, not in an errant comment here and there by President Trump, but we have chaos and crisis everywhere we look. The grocery store, the gas pump, the southern border, in our communities and neighborhoods, and certainly abroad, Maria, where the hot spots are going on. So I feel it was, and look, they had downplayed Walz's ability to perform in this debate, but he should have been ready for a couple of the big questions. Like he lied about where he was. He just say, I made a mistake. That was 25 years or 35 years ago. I made a mistake, but I was there for a while, and it matters. Here's the thing I saw last night. Tim Walz made a mistake by evading the facts and evading the media. J.D. Vance showed Americans who also have evolved on Donald Trump how he did. He wasn't for Trump all along, and that's okay. He said Trump's performance in office has convinced him to be a Trump advocate and, in fact, his running mate. That's a guy ready on day one to be president.
Yeah. No, I think you make great points. I think I would have liked to see a little more of the narrative that you are laying out. I would have liked to see a little more of an attack dog on from J.D. Vance to basically say, hey, the world is on fire. You've got two wars underway. Now you've got a strike. You've got inflation, which hit 40-year highs, and your girl was in charge these last 4 years. But I didn't hear enough on that about inflation, which is the number one issue for people. But I agree, J.D. Came across calm and showed leadership. And Walz was certainly, well, he did look somewhat afraid. You know, he was the underdog.
He was, and look, people don't need dad and plaid and folksiness. That's all adorable. Who's more accessible? Who do you want to have a beer with? We stopped asking those questions in our polling probably decades ago. Yeah. Because that's not what's at stake here, everybody. You need somebody who's fit, who's steady, ready, can be commander-in-chief, can be the steward of our domestic economy, all of which is incredibly important. These are the tests. You know, Maria, it's like the word electability. We heard that word ad infinitum for decades. Who's electable? Who he can win, he can't win. We heard about Republican candidates. We heard about about Donald Trump, and then he vanquished 17 Republicans in the primaries in 2016 and beat the Queen Bee herself, Hillary Clinton, who among an electorate that was plus female voters. We have been a majority of the voters. We decide the president since 1964. This is our 15th or 16th consecutive presidential race. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because the pundits and the political class ask who can win. Voters ask who can lead. And that's what they're going to see from last night. They're not going to ask who won the debate. They're going to say who showed me that they are steady and ready, who gave me confidence in their competence, and who's listening to me. I also think that JD did a smart thing. Question one, unsurprisingly, was about Iran. But he said, let me introduce myself to America. He took 45 seconds to do that. For those who don't remember what he said or never saw what he said at the RNC, who have only heard an errant comment here and there, and he basically challenged his country to do something. Don't measure me in full based on a thing I said here, a thing I said there. Measure me on what you see here. Am I ready to support the Trump agenda? And I believe he is. And you talked about attack dogs. We have Donald Trump for that. Mike Pence and Donald Trump had a very good relationship and a great presidency and vice presidency for 3 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks. It worked very
good
well.
Points. Yeah, very
different
good
styles.
Points. True on all of the above. So do you think last night's debate moved the needle on anything? It sounds like what you're saying is that you do think that people saw J.D. Vance for who he is. They saw leadership. They saw calm, and that did move the needle. But let's look at these polls because they do show an expanding race in key swing states for President Trump. A new Quinnipiac poll finds that in Georgia, Trump has a 6-point lead over Kamala Harris, 50% to 44%. In North Carolina, Trump still has the edge, 49% to 47%. An Emerson poll also finds Trump tops Harris in Arizona, but the candidates are tied in Pennsylvania, Kellyanne. So first question, did last night move the needle? Do you feel like, in fact, he got more votes for the Trump ticket? And what do you think of these polls so tight?
So first of all, if those polls held and today was Election Day, Donald Trump would win. That means the underlying fundamentals benefit him. I would have thought that Kamala Harris would be doing better in the Sunbelt states, higher minority populations. She's actually fighting for Wisconsin, Michigan, most of all, and then tag on Pennsylvania. If Donald Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, Marie, he's the next president. And it's trending that way. Why? And remember, when he picked J.D., a reporter asked him, what's your plan for J.D. Vance on the trail? Quote, I think I'll park him in Pennsylvania. So obviously, J.D. Vance has gone many other places and spaces, but that is an important point to reflect on now, months later, that J.D. Vance from Ohio does have a certain pull in Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is tough for Kamala Harris, the Catholic vote. She's not Scranton Joe. The Teamsters did not endorse her, et cetera. And what President Trump said to me in an hour-long interview 2 short days ago, Maria, is advisable. He feels that when he goes to these places, he had just been in Erie County, he's going to go back. He's doing that 2016 election schedule again, where it's the 22 counties, the 160,000 truly undecided voters. I think J.D. Vance is going to help that ticket win now because people are going to say the first choice Kamala Harris and Donald Trump made was their running mates. I prefer Vance over Walz.
All right, check out Kellyanne's interview with President Trump on Fox Nation. Make sure to check out Here's the Deal with Kellyanne. It is streaming on Fox Nation.
Let's go straight back to the jobs report. 254,000 jobs were added in the month of September, much higher than expected. Lydia Hu is outside the Labor Department with Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su. All right, Lydia, it's all yours. Take it away.
Hi there, Ash. Thank you so much. We're so pleased to be joined by Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su to talk about this morning's surprising jobs report. 254,000 jobs added when 140,000 were expected. Unemployment ticking down to 4.1% when 4.2% was what was expected. I'm sure that you will probably say this is a strong jobs report, but I do want to start with this because it seems like this is changing direction. We have had a series of job reports this year that have indicated a cooling labor market. So my question to you is today's report really an exception or an anomaly?
I mean, let's look at what the jobs report have told us really since the Biden-Harris administration began. We have had a record recovery, right? The numbers of jobs created, the record low levels of unemployment. This is not just like, 4.1% once. It has been the longest stretch of unemployment at or below 4%, near 4%, since most of us were born. That's not an anomaly. And the fact that we continue to see robust job growth across multiple industries, not an anomaly. Now, the story of this economy was definitely not predicted, though, right? 4 years ago, let's just think about exactly where we were 4 years ago. In the last administration, it was September. Back to school meant back to Zoom. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and there was no national strategy to get it under control. October, kids were being told trick or treat is being canceled. We're in a very different place now, not because of 1 month, but because of really strong economic policies that have powered a historic recovery.
Well, let's talk more about this data, because baked in here too, we are seeing some revisions. And what's different in this report is that we're seeing revisions to the upside. From July, for example, excuse me, adding 55,000 jobs. That is a change from what we have seen over the past year. Coming into this report, we had actually seen revisions to the downside. The Labor Department reporting that they had over-reported job growth by 800,000. So I'm wondering, how can we even trust that this data is accurate when we are seeing wild gyrations in the revisions?
Well, I would dispute the characterization of wild gyrations. Again, month after month, there has been job growth, period, to the tune of some 16 million over the period of this administration. The last administration was one of only two to lose jobs from the time they came into the time they left. But let's talk about the revisions, because the reason why these numbers are considered the gold standard, the reason why they're relied on for everything from markets to economic policy, is because it really is the most robust collection of data about the state of the job market.
If that's so, then how can we see revisions 8,000 to the downside before, and now we see job revisions to the upside?
I'm glad you asked that, because revisions are a part of the process. We report the data as it comes in. The reason I can come out here every month and report them is that we give people a very narrow window to tell us what happened in the month. They have 13 days to report it. Some people don't make that deadline, right? I'm sure you as a student, I as a student, sometimes we miss deadlines. But once we report it, it gets integrated, for sure. But it gets integrated into the numbers. And so the revisions actually prove just how transparent and reliable they are, because we report the facts as we see them, and the facts are a very good story.
Let's drill down into some of those sectors, because you mentioned a few of them where you're seeing some job growth. But one area where we are not seeing job growth is manufacturing, and that is concerning. In this report, we saw 7,000 manufacturing jobs lost in the country. The expectation was 5,000, and that's continuing what is troubling to some, a trend of declining manufacturing jobs. According to our good colleague Edward Lawrence, who usually has this post, the 3-month average now is roughly 9,300 jobs lost per month in manufacturing. So what is wrong with manufacturing in America?
Again, let's look at the overall picture. So manufacturing jobs have grown under this administration, also not by accident, right? Part of the Biden-Harris Investing in America agenda.
I think it's roughly 160,000 jobs that have been added under the administration for
exactly.
manufacturing.
So added is the point, right? It is inaccurate to say that we haven't grown manufacturing, and we've grown it not by accident.
What's the trend now? Why are we seeing it seems like a change? Because for the month after month recently this year, we're seeing a downward decline in manufacturing jobs.
So the reality is, we are now opening up manufacturing facilities in parts of the country where they had been closed in the last administration. I visited them. Jobs where people had to leave their community, leave their families to go work somewhere else are now able to come home. You're right, though. We're not done. We've got more work to do on this. And part of the Investing in America agenda is the idea is we should be able to make things at home again, right? If we invent them, we should be able to make them here. And you have to build facilities before you can hire people to manufacture things in them. Construction jobs are up, so the building is happening. Those investments take some time, and the fact that we've seen them just in the last 4 years is, again, not a declaration of victory, but a declaration of progress. We're moving in the right direction. We need to keep it up.
Secretary Sue, I want to ask you about the port worker strike, because you have a tentative deal that was brokered just yesterday, stopping what was a 3-day strike, huge implications and consequences for the economy, and also raising a lot of concerns about recovery from Hurricane Helene. Is the reason that we have a tentative deal the hurricane? Would we not have had a deal if we didn't have that hurricane?
So the reason we have a tentative deal is because the parties collectively bargained. You've heard the president say this over and over again. The vice president says it too. Collective bargaining works. It isn't always pretty. It can get very messy. It can get heated in public. But when parties sit down at the table, when workers have a real voice, when unions, right, when workers are represented by unions, they can have a voice in their jobs. They can say, in an industry that I have helped to create, right? Think about longshoremen who work through the pandemic. They do difficult, sometimes dangerous jobs.
Yes.
They support whole families and whole communities, right, as a result. When I was with them yesterday, when a deal was on the horizon. They were ready to get back to work last night, right? So they wanted to be working. And the reality is their ability to get this historic wage increase and for the companies to come forward and make this offer is because the economy is strong, profits are high, and everybody should get a share in it. So collective bargaining works. That's the main reason why it happened. But you're right. It also, what happens at the ports affects everything, right? And it's, it's emergency goods. It's things coming in.
Right.
And the parties understood that they had a responsibility too.
Secretary, we still had a strike that lasted for 3 days. When I looked to your predecessor, Marty Walsh, he was dealing with a labor dispute with the railroads, and he insisted both sides come to his office, and he had talks. He insisted that the union show up and participate in negotiations. Why didn't you do that with the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association?
I mean, they were negotiating, right? And we're proud of them negotiating.
Did they come to D.C. for the meeting?
We have negotiations here, and we have negotiations where the parties are. We were out in California, and that's how the West Coast Port contract was negotiated. It depends on, there's no one formula for these negotiations. But the fact of the matter is,
why not force them to come?
We do what works, right? And under this administration, we have seen historic wage increases. We've seen, industries all across the country, right? Auto workers, airline flight attendants, hospitality, healthcare workers, actors and writers, and both coasts at the docks. We're seeing not just, the goal is not just to reach a contract. The goal is to make sure that workers get a little bit of the prosperity that they're creating.
President Biden telegraphed early on he was not going to use Taft-Hartley, and he also issued statements that he expected a, quote, fair offer as the employers are making offers, kind of passing judgment, I think, on what was being made, what was being extended. Do you think that this administration is giving the union too much power?
I think what we're seeing is working people are tired of falling behind. The last administration engaged in union busting. In the last administration, again, more jobs lost than created. I think that what's happening right now is that working people realize that they should get they're really critical in our economy, and they deserve a voice at the table. They should get some of what they've made possible. And the contract that, the tentative that we saw is evidence of that, and we see it across the country.
And now 90 days to work out the final details. Some of those, I think, maybe we can agree might be the most complicated with automation, and we're going to stay on the story. Ash, I'm going to send it back to you.